she's been arrested, caught in an FBI sting that just tore down the palace's biggest mystery. In a shocking turn of events, Meghan Markle has been taken into custody after an explosive FBI raid exposed what investigators are calling a multi-million-dollar media manipulation scheme. According to federal agents, her team orchestrated a secret disinformation ring, planting fake royal stories, rewriting public narratives, and targeting key members of the royal family with precision smear campaigns. Sources say she spent millions crafting a false version of royal history, and now, that house of cards is crashing down. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Is this the final unraveling of the Sussex empire? The evidence is damning. The names involved are jaw-dropping. And what investigators just found in those encrypted files may change everything we thought we knew about Meghan, the monarchy, and the media. Stay with us. Under the blazing spotlight of scandal and speculation, few names command as much global fascination and controversy as Meghan Markle. Her journey from Hollywood actress to Duchess of Sussex was once hailed as a modern-day fairy tale, an American commoner swept into one of the most storied monarchies in history. But now, years after stepping back from royal duties and repositioning herself as an independent media figure, Meghan finds herself at the center of an explosive FBI investigation. The headlines scream of arrests, covert PR operations, and multi-million-dollar manipulation schemes. The royal world has never been short on drama, but this moment, this seismic rupture, may mark a historic turning point. In a time when narratives are currency and public perception can make or break a legacy, one question rises above the noise. Has Meghan Markle finally reached the end of the line? The world was jolted awake by the flashing red alerts on every major media outlet. Meghan Markle arrested following an FBI raid. The operation, sources say, uncovered a sprawling and deeply sophisticated public relations machine allegedly orchestrated by Markle's inner circle. It wasn't just about image control or spin. According to preliminary reports and leaked documents, this was a multi-pronged operation involving paid misinformation campaigns, blacklisting palace officials, faking insider interviews, and planting fabricated royal stories in top-tier publications. The objective? Control the narrative at all costs. To the public, Meghan's life post-royalty appeared polished and purposeful. Multi-million-dollar Netflix deals, viral podcast interviews, and high-profile appearances at political and humanitarian events painted the image of a woman who had transcended the constraints of royalty and become an influential cultural voice. But behind the curtain, federal investigators were tracing a digital trail of manipulation that suggested something far more orchestrated. This wasn't just about clout, it was about control, about rewriting history. But how did we get here? The seeds of this collapse were sown long before the FBI raid. When Meghan and Prince Harry stepped down as senior working royals in 2020, citing mental health concerns, media harassment, and lack of support from the royal institution, the world split into two camps. Those who admired their courage to escape a toxic environment, and those who believed they were weaponizing victimhood for personal gain. That schism was only deepened by their bombshell interview with Oprah Winfrey, where accusations of racism, cold indifference, and family betrayal were laid bare for the world to digest. Even then, the divide was clear. Some hailed the interview as a revolutionary act of truth-telling. Others saw it as a calculated PR move. But few imagined that behind the scenes, federal investigators were quietly amassing evidence suggesting that what the world had watched on television was merely the surface of a far more deliberate campaign to reshape the royal narrative. The FBI's investigation reportedly began over a year ago when several anonymous whistleblowers, some from within major media houses, raised red flags about the consistency of certain stories involving the British royal family. Investigative journalists began to notice peculiar patterns. Articles being syndicated across networks with nearly identical wording, unverified sources being quoted as insiders, and negative stories about certain royal figures, particularly those closest to Queen Elizabeth, being promoted through obscure social media accounts that shared uncanny similarities. When federal agents dug deeper, they uncovered what they now describe as a covert influence ring. A nexus of PR consultants, digital marketing experts, and shell media entities allegedly funded by donors and backers tied to Meghan's commercial ventures. Leaked communications pointed to strategic timelines, stories appearing just before major Netflix announcements, damaging leaks about William and Kate's surfacing days before Meghan and Harry's public appearances, and orchestrated social media storms that turned public opinion at pivotal moments. As one former intelligence analyst put it, this wasn't a rogue PR firm getting creative. This was industrial-scale manipulation. And it was global. By the time the FBI raided a luxury office building in Los Angeles, allegedly housing the operations hub of the scheme, they had amassed enough evidence to make a legal move against Meghan. The arrest, which sources describe as coordinated and quiet, was carried out with minimal fanfare, but its ripple effects were instant. News of the arrest leaked within hours, sending shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, Hollywood, and the media world. Social media erupted. Was this justice? A takedown? Or an elaborate smear campaign? As always, opinions splintered. But make no mistake, the implications of this moment are monumental. If the FBI's claims hold, then the public has been unwittingly complicit in consuming a distorted version of royal history. And at the center of that distortion sits Meghan Markle, a figure either tragically misunderstood or stunningly manipulative, depending on where one stands. The arrest has reignited long-standing tensions between the Sussexes and the royal family. Buckingham Palace, often tight-lipped in public matters, released a brief but loaded statement acknowledging the FBI's investigation while expressing deep concern over the integrity of the public narrative surrounding the institution. While they stopped short of directly naming Meghan, Palace insiders suggest this is the closest they've come to openly criticizing her in official terms. Meanwhile, supporters of Meghan are rallying online, accusing the media of perpetuating a modern-day witch hunt against a woman of color who dared to challenge the establishment. To them, this is not about PR manipulation. It's about a powerful institution using law enforcement to punish dissent. The debate is fierce. The facts, however, are emerging with growing clarity. Among the more damning revelations are documents indicating that multiple fake social media accounts, each posing as former palace staff or concerned insiders, were used to feed tabloids false stories. One such story, which claimed Kate Middleton once refused to speak to Meghan during a royal Christmas event, was later traced to a media firm with alleged financial ties to Archewell, Meghan and Harry's foundation. Another planted rumor about Prince Charles refusing to see his granddaughter, Lilibet, was found to have originated from a bot network linked to a PR analytics company based in Beverly Hills. The most unsettling element? Reports that millions of dollars were funneled into these operations. Wire transfers, some of them flagged by international banks as suspicious, reportedly trace back to Meghan's commercial entities and donor accounts associated with foreign contributors. The FBI believes this wasn't just a domestic scandal. It was international influence meddling, masquerading as public relations. As more details surface, the picture becomes clearer, though no less disturbing. Meghan's rise, her independence, her media rebranding all may have been crafted atop a bedrock of disinformation. And if proven in court, the consequences could be devastating, not just for her brand, but for her freedom. This isn't merely a tabloid drama. This is a collision of modern fame, institutional power, digital warfare, and the law. It's a story that forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about truth, manipulation, and the cost of control. Did Meghan Markle simply defend herself against a hostile press and cold-hearted monarchy? Or did she orchestrate a strategic campaign to vilify her enemies and rewrite the royal story on her terms? The world is watching. The stakes are staggering. And for Meghan Markle, the storybook ending may be slipping out of reach. To understand the full weight of the FBI's investigation into Meghan Markle, one must first dissect the empire she built from the moment she stepped onto the world stage. It wasn't just a personal brand. It was a movement, a message, a meticulously engineered strategy that turned a Hollywood actress into one of the most influential, polarizing figures in the world. But this empire wasn't created in a vacuum. It was cultivated through narrative control, image precision, and the careful elimination of dissent. And it all began the moment Meghan Markle walked into the British royal spotlight. Her courtship with Prince Harry, at first, appeared charming and organic, a whirlwind romance born of modern love. A mixed-race American woman, self-made, outspoken, and socially conscious, winning the heart of the British prince once known for his rebellious streak. Their story promised a progressive future for the monarchy, a symbol that even the centuries-old traditions of the British crown could evolve. The world was captivated. But the honeymoon phase was brief. From the very beginning, Meghan understood the stakes. She wasn't just joining a royal family, she was entering a system layered in legacy, hierarchy, and unspoken codes of conduct. According to sources close to the palace, Meghan arrived with a media-savvy mindset, ready to shape her own narrative. While past royal wives had allowed palace press offices to mediate public statements and interviews, Meghan came armed with her own PR experts, image consultants, and strategic advisors. This wasn't about assimilation, it was about transformation. And that's when the friction began. Inside Buckingham Palace, courtiers and senior aides quickly noticed an unusual number of media requests originating from US-based outlets. Profiles, interviews, and photo ops were being negotiated directly with outside teams, circumventing traditional royal press protocols. One aide, speaking anonymously, described it as a takeover of the narrative machine. Another insider recalled that palace staff were stunned to discover Meghan's team had created detailed dossiers on UK journalists, rating them based on perceived bias or friendliness. Then came the social media strategy. Meghan's team identified key influencers in the United States and United Kingdom. Journalists, celebrities, and cultural commentators who could subtly advocate for her. Gifts were sent. Dinners were arranged. Organic tweets were encouraged. According to a leaked internal memo from one PR firm contracted by Meghan's circle, the goal was clear: shape opinion through authentic amplification, silence critics through moral framing. And for a time, it worked. Headlines gushed about her fashion choices, her modernity, her outspokenness. Oprah, Beyoncé, and Serena Williams publicly praised her. Meghan was no longer just a duchess. She was a symbol. A woman who had walked into an ancient institution and dared to speak. But even as the public celebrated her transformation, Meghan and her team were working behind the scenes to ensure that nothing disrupted the narrative. The turning point, many believe, was the announcement that she and Harry would be stepping back from their royal duties. Megxit, as it was dubbed, wasn't merely a decision to escape the glare of the royal spotlight. It was a calculated pivot. According to newly uncovered internal communications between Meghan's representatives and Netflix executives, the couple had already begun early talks about content creation deals months before the announcement was made public. Likewise, draft proposals for podcast concepts and children's books were being floated around in publishing circles before the formal exit was finalized. These were not the actions of a couple blindsided by negative press or overwhelmed by palace politics. These were the deliberate steps of individuals preparing for the next stage of a public life, one free of royal constraints and driven by global monetization. Meghan and Harry weren't leaving the monarchy behind. They were rebranding it. The Archewell Foundation, launched shortly thereafter, became the hub of this rebrand. Publicly marketed as a philanthropic initiative aimed at compassion and cultural change, internal documents now under FBI scrutiny paint a more nuanced picture. Donor rosters included anonymous contributions from entities registered in tax haven countries. Several of the foundation's media campaigns, featuring heavily polished videos and carefully scripted content, were reportedly managed by a team of political consultants previously employed by major U.S. political campaigns. The foundation wasn't just raising money. It was collecting data, names, emails, locations, an entire ecosystem of followers who could be mobilized at any moment to support Meghan's narrative. As part of the FBI's investigation, digital forensic experts are now reviewing whether some of these databases were used to launch coordinated social media campaigns against royal critics, British tabloids, and even rival charities. If proven, it would mark a stunning intersection of charitable outreach and digital warfare. Central to Meghan's rise was the art of selective storytelling. When she sat with Oprah in a serene California garden and spoke about feeling isolated, suicidal, and unsupported, the world was riveted. The interview painted a vivid picture of suffering, strength, and survival. But what the public didn't see were the multiple drafts of talking points reviewed by legal and PR teams prior to filming. According to an anonymous source close to Harpo Productions, Meghan's statements were vetted, adjusted, and in some cases, coached. At one point during the taping, Oprah reportedly pushed back on a vague reference Meghan made to a senior royal questioning Archie's skin tone. The production team, worried about legal repercussions, discussed whether to bleep the entire section. Ultimately, it aired, igniting global debate and outrage. Yet no name was ever officially confirmed. The ambiguity itself became a weapon, damning without being definitive. These layers of orchestration, now visible under the lens of federal scrutiny, suggest that what the world consumed as confession may have been more akin to performance. An emotional, well-executed performance, but a performance nonetheless. And with performance came expansion. The couple's deal with Netflix was reportedly worth over $100 million, though insiders now say a portion of those funds were funneled through shell companies for creative development expenses that are under investigation. Similarly, Meghan's children's book deal with a major publisher included a clause for foreign rights distribution that raised eyebrows due to its unusual breadth and lack of standard oversight. Every move, every media moment, every partnership carefully measured, perfectly timed. Yet underneath the glamour, cracks were forming. Reports began surfacing that multiple staff members hired during Meghan's time in the palace had quit within months, citing hostile work environments and emotional abuse. The palace launched an internal review, but Meghan's team dismissed it as character assassination. In private, however, emails now in the possession of the FBI show frantic damage control, including instructions to discredit one former aide through anonymous leaks to entertainment bloggers. Even in Los Angeles, the empire was maintained through discipline and hierarchy. Former employees have come forward, under federal protection, alleging non-disclosure agreements with aggressive financial penalties and threats of professional blacklisting. One whistleblower, who worked on the Archwell digital media team, testified that they were instructed to create burner accounts on Instagram and Twitter to defend Meghan against negative stories and to promote sympathetic posts, giving the appearance of grassroots support. The digital manipulation was not only extensive but expensive. Investigators have traced payments to firms specializing in online bot deployment and reputation management, services typically used by political campaigns or international corporations. Meghan's brand, it seems, was not just protected. It was militarized. What began as a vision of empowerment has now transformed into a case study in overreach. With each new revelation, the lines between ambition and deception blur further. Meghan's ascent was not accidental. It was planned, rehearsed, and executed with precision. But in the pursuit of narrative control, she may have crossed the very lines that separate influence from manipulation, truth from distortion, and freedom from accountability. What lies ahead is not only a legal reckoning, but a cultural one. For years, Meghan Markle has been a lightning rod in conversations about race, gender, class, and media ethics. But with the FBI's findings beginning to surface and the palace subtly reclaiming control of the narrative, a new conversation is emerging, one not about whether she was a victim or a villain, but about whether the very foundations of modern celebrity have enabled a dangerous distortion of truth. As the FBI's investigation into Meghan Markle's transatlantic activities intensified, agents began to uncover not only irregularities in financial transactions and digital activities, but also the existence of a shadowy network of individuals operating behind the scenes. These were not anonymous aides or temporary consultants. They were seasoned power brokers, media tycoons, tech giants, political strategists, international financiers, and entertainment executives who appeared to form a web of mutual interest that kept Meghan's brand thriving, protected, and immune from scrutiny for years. This network didn't just emerge out of Meghan's royal fame. It had roots reaching back to her Hollywood days. Long before she met Prince Harry, Meghan had demonstrated a unique ability to connect with influential figures in Los Angeles. Former colleagues from her Suits days describe a woman who was relentless in her networking, frequenting high-end industry mixers, befriending media consultants, and aligning herself with politically active celebrities. But her most impactful connections were made not at red carpet events, but behind closed doors, through strategic dinners, quiet meetings, and shared causes. According to internal FBI documents now being reviewed by a congressional oversight committee, a series of encrypted communications suggests that Meghan maintained regular contact with at least 3 major U.S.-based public relations firms that specialize in what is called perception warfare. These firms are not simply tasked with creating press releases or booking TV appearances. Their specialty is influence engineering, targeting narratives, suppressing opposition, and orchestrating PUBL. One such firm, headquartered in Manhattan with satellite offices in London and Dubai, has been previously linked to foreign lobbying scandals and social media manipulation in political elections. Though Meghan was never directly named in its public-facing client list, a former employee turned whistleblower alleges that she operated through intermediaries, specifically a small LLC registered in Delaware known as Cobalt Key Strategies. This shell entity, according to bank records now subpoenaed by investigators, funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars in consulting fees from Archwell Foundation-related accounts. But Meghan's web of influence extended far beyond PR manipulation. It tapped into the veins of media empires, where editorial decisions could be swayed with a single call or text. Investigators uncovered internal Slack messages from senior editors at a major streaming platform, names redacted in the released files, discussing how critical documentaries on the royal family were to be restructured or quietly shelved to avoid offending Meghan and Harry during their contract period. In one particularly telling exchange, a senior content director wrote, "She, Meghan, doesn't want anything airing that complicates the oppressed wife narrative. Legal's involved. Make sure the cut reflects that." These messages raise profound questions about the media's role not just in telling stories, but in bending the truth to suit the agendas of the powerful. Beyond the media, Meghan's network thrived within Silicon Valley, where platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube were used not just for outreach but for influence exertion. Investigators have traced campaign-style analytics packages purchased by entities linked to Meghan's foundation, packages typically used by political campaigns to monitor sentiment shifts in real time. These tools allowed her team to monitor trending hashtags, keywords, and negative sentiment spikes, then rapidly deploy counter-messaging through proxies or coordinated influencer posts. One such influencer, a popular feminist content creator with over 12 million followers, is now confirmed to have received over $300,000 in consulting payments from an agency working with Archwell's media arm. The influencer, known for aggressive defenses of Meghan during high-profile controversies, repeatedly denied any financial relationship in public. But the digital trail uncovered by the FBI suggests otherwise, and it appears she was just one of dozens. Among the most disturbing discoveries in the ongoing investigation was the revelation that some of the public-facing defenders of Meghan, people who appeared as independent commentators on daytime talk shows, online forums, and even academic panels, were in fact being compensated through a complex lattice of grants, honorariums, or indirect sponsorships. In many cases, the connections were buried through multiple corporate entities, making them nearly impossible to trace without subpoena power. This machinery didn't exist solely to promote positive coverage. It also served as a deterrent. Sources within the investigative team revealed that several journalists who had published critical pieces on Meghan, particularly regarding staff abuse allegations or questionable charitable practices, were targeted in what one FBI source described as online intimidation campaigns. These campaigns included doxing, anonymous threats, and in some instances, coordinated harassment via fake accounts. One UK-based reporter, who wrote a piece examining Meghan's allegedly aggressive dealings with royal staff, received over 5,000 abusive messages in a single week. Her email account was hacked. Her children's names were posted online. Eventually, she was forced to take a leave of absence. Digital forensics experts have traced many of the originating IP addresses to servers rented by a now-defunct digital consulting firm believed to be under Meghan's wider strategic network. The firm, since shuttered, left behind a paper trail of gig workers paid to manage sock puppet accounts and spread hashtags designed to overwhelm or silence critics. Simultaneously, Meghan's inner circle was drawing powerful protection from U.S. political circles. A leaked memo shared between staffers for a high-ranking U.S. senator outlines a sensitivity brief advising public figures not to speak critically of the Duchess, especially in relation to her race, activism, or mental health claims. The briefing document, prepared by a private contractor, framed Meghan as a cultural lightning rod with international implications, arguing that negative commentary risks backlash from key progressive demographics and threatens donor pipelines. To some insiders, this was merely politics as usual. To others, it pointed to a more insidious possibility that Meghan's brand had evolved from a media enterprise to a protected political instrument. The FBI is now reportedly investigating whether any campaign contributions were made through intermediaries connected to Archwell or Meghan's other LLCs, and whether those contributions were linked to political favors or influence shielding. At the heart of this web lies the question of complicity. How many people in Hollywood, politics, and media knew what was happening? How many enabled it, either through silent approval or active participation? The answer, agents believe, may lie in a cache of emails obtained from a former senior advisor who abruptly left Meghan's team in late 2023. These emails, which are now sealed under federal warrant, allegedly outline a coordinated strategy for maintaining favorable relationships with key journalists, producers, tech executives, and even members of royal staff still sympathetic to Meghan. One stunning exchange involved an unnamed British tabloid editor and a representative from Meghan's American PR team. The message, dated 2 months before the infamous Oprah interview, reads, "We're willing to provide exclusive content, photos, clips, quotes, in exchange for a soft line on Harry's security demands and Meghan's family history." The editor reportedly agreed, asking only for a delay in publishing a pending negative story. That story never ran. Perhaps most damning are the connections to foreign investors. Financial records from Archwell-related ventures show repeated transactions involving trusts and funds located in countries notorious for secrecy, including the British Virgin Islands and Liechtenstein. One transaction, a $4.2 million injection into a media development firm linked to Meghan's podcasting endeavors, came from a Hong Kong-based holding company that previously funded soft power projects tied to foreign governments. The motive behind the transaction is unclear, but it has triggered a multi-agency review, including involvement from the U.S. Treasury. The walls are closing in on Meghan's network, not because she made enemies in Buckingham Palace, but because her ambitions and methods may have collided with federal law, ethical boundaries, and the invisible lines of public trust. The FBI's unfolding investigation isn't just about Meghan Markle. It is about the architecture of modern influence, how it's built, who it serves, and what it costs when truth becomes negotiable. For years, Princess Anne, known for her unwavering discretion and unflinching commitment to the dignity of the monarchy, remained in the background of royal family scandals. Often seen as the stoic figure in a sea of public relations blunders and tabloid frenzies, she had built her life on duty, discipline, and a strong belief in the sanctity of the crown. She rarely involved herself in royal family drama, maintaining a clear boundary between her private convictions and public responsibilities. However, all of that changed the moment she came into possession of a recording that shook her to the core, a recording in which Meghan Markle allegedly issued threats against Queen Elizabeth II. Those close to and have long known her to be a woman of principle. She had supported her mother, Queen Elizabeth, with relentless devotion, rarely giving interviews, never chasing headlines. She worked quietly but tirelessly, engaging in over 500 engagements a year well into her 70s, earning the respect of many as the hardest-working royal. For Anne, the monarchy was not a celebrity playground or a branding opportunity. It was an institution that symbolized centuries of national continuity. Watching it be distorted, criticized, and in her view, weaponized by Meghan Markle caused her deep concern, but she remained silent until she heard the recording. According to multiple palace insiders, the audio came into Anne's possession through an unlikely channel, a former senior staffer at Sandringham who had served during the Queen's final years. This individual, loyal to the late monarch and disturbed by what he described as a toxic culture surrounding Meghan's private communications, retained a digital copy of an encrypted message intercepted via a compromised device during a security audit. He had hesitated for over a year, unsure of what to do with the explosive material. But after witnessing what he believed to be escalating manipulation of public narratives, he handed it directly to Princess Anne. The contents of the recording have not been officially released, but according to reliable leaks, it allegedly features Meghan making veiled but unmistakable threats concerning Queen Elizabeth's health, reputation, and legacy. In what has been described as a chilling tone, Meghan purportedly suggested that unless certain demands were met, including silence from palace staff regarding her past behavior and continued financial support for her and Harry's ventures, damaging information about the royal family would be strategically released. The timing of the recording, just months before the Queen's death, and the stress she was reportedly under during this period, has led many within the royal circle to view it as unconscionable. For Princess Anne, this was the moment when silence was no longer an option. Sources close to her say she agonized over the decision. She consulted with only a tight circle of confidants. Longtime advisors, a retired judge with a history in royal legal matters, and her brother Prince Edward. Though initially hesitant to act, fearing further scandal, the growing brazenness of Harry and Meghan's public attacks, paired with the contents of the recording, pushed into her limit. She made the decision to leak the audio not to destroy Meghan personally, but to protect the integrity of the monarchy and, as one insider put it, to honor her mother's memory. The leak was not done recklessly, and coordinated the release through trusted intermediaries, ensuring the audio found its way to investigative journalists with a track record of rigorous sourcing and legal precision. The chosen media outlet, known for its cautious approach and historically sympathetic coverage of the royal family, vetted the recording over several weeks. Voice authentication experts were brought in. Legal teams combed through every word. And finally, in a carefully worded expose, the story broke. The public reaction was instant and explosive. Within hours, the palace was inundated with press requests. Social media erupted in debate, outrage, and speculation. Supporters of Meghan called the leak a targeted smear campaign, questioning its timing and authenticity. But for many Britons, especially older generations who had revered Queen Elizabeth as a pillar of national stability, the idea that she may have been privately bullied or threatened in her final years ignited deep fury. More tellingly, the leak fractured public opinion in the United States. For years, Meghan and Harry had enjoyed considerable support in American media, particularly among progressive outlets. But this story, with its themes of familial betrayal, power manipulation, and personal intimidation, was harder to defend. Polling conducted within days of the leak showed a dramatic dip in public trust for the Sussexes, particularly among previously supportive demographics. Even some of their celebrity allies began to retreat, quietly distancing themselves from public endorsements and joint ventures. Inside the palace, Anne's decision reverberated like an earthquake. She did not issue a public statement, staying true to her lifelong practice of letting actions speak louder than words. But her resolve was clear. Those familiar with the Queen's final months believe and saw herself as fulfilling a moral obligation, not just to her mother, but to the institution they had both served for decades. Her brother, King Charles III, reportedly responded with a mix of gratitude and private discomfort. On one hand, the exposure of the recording vindicated years of quiet concerns about Meghan's intentions. On the other hand, it complicated ongoing legal and diplomatic issues involving the Sussexes, who still carried international visibility and remained entangled in numerous financial and philanthropic arrangements that touched the royal family's legacy. Still, he did not rebuke it. As one palace aide described it, the king knows his sister doesn't act lightly. If she decided to do this, he trusts there was good reason. What emerged in the weeks following the leak was a dramatic shift in royal strategy. The palace stopped issuing mild, non-confrontational statements regarding Meghan and Harry. For the first time, legal options were publicly discussed. Royal allies in Parliament began speaking more openly about the need to safeguard the monarchy from undue influence. Even traditionally apolitical voices began weighing in, suggesting reforms to prevent private individuals from exploiting royal status for personal gain. And meanwhile, returned to her usual routine. She declined interviews. She made no mention of the leak during her engagements. But her presence took on a new gravity. Where once she had been seen as a steadfast, workhorse royal, now she was viewed as a quiet warrior, the one who dared to pull back the curtain. Her approval ratings soared. In an unexpected twist, young people who had previously favored Meghan for her modernity began expressing admiration for Anne's stoic strength. The moral implications of Anne's decision are still being debated. Was it right to expose private communications, even in defense of a greater good? Did the ends justify the means? Legal experts are divided. Some argue the leak, while perhaps justified on ethical grounds, may open the royal family to lawsuits. Others say it was a necessary act of transparency in a time when misinformation and weaponized media have eroded public trust. One thing is clear, Anne's actions marked a turning point. The royal family, long accused of passivity in the face of Meghan and Harry's accusations, finally drew a line, not with public bickering or media interviews, but through a quiet, deliberate act of truth-telling. The kind of move that reflected the Queen's values far more than any press release ever could. As the world reeled from the leak, Princess Anne continued her engagements, opening hospitals, honoring military veterans, and championing animal welfare causes. She did not waver. She had done what she believed was necessary to protect the monarchy, and in doing so, she reminded the world that beneath the pomp and circumstance of royalty lies real conviction, and sometimes, real courage. The leak of the recording, allegedly containing Meghan Markle's threats against Queen Elizabeth II, sent a seismic shockwave through the monarchy and beyond. In the wake of Princess Anne's bold and unprecedented decision, every corner of the royal institution was forced to reckon with the fallout. What had once been quiet tension and behind-the-scenes whispers turned into a global public relations crisis, a constitutional dilemma, and a cultural confrontation with far-reaching consequences. At Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere shifted from measured calm to controlled crisis. Meetings that would usually have been scheduled weeks in advance were now being held daily, sometimes multiple times per day. Senior royal aides, legal teams, and crisis managers convened behind closed doors, poring over public sentiment, media coverage, and legal vulnerabilities. The monarchy had endured decades of scandal, but this one cut deeper, not just because of its content, but because of what it represented, a possible breach of the monarchy's inner sanctum by someone who once claimed to be family. King Charles III, still early in his reign and attempting to craft a legacy of unity and modernization, found himself caught in a storm with no precedent. Sources close to him suggest that while he sympathized with his sister Anne's motives, he was also deeply aware of the dangers that now loomed. International scrutiny had intensified. The Commonwealth was watching, and allies within the UK government were demanding clarity. Questions began circulating in Parliament, not in the form of legislation, but as murmurs of concern about royal accountability and the extent of security vulnerabilities within the monarchy. The Prime Minister, though constitutionally restricted in royal affairs, was briefed on the situation and privately advised by senior cabinet members to remain neutral but attentive. While the government officially upheld its respect for the privacy and independence of the monarchy, opposition leaders saw an opportunity to critique royal spending, calling for audits into the security apparatus that had failed to prevent such a recording from being made and eventually leaked. Meanwhile, Prince William, often seen as the steady hand of the new generation, reportedly entered what insiders described as a period of quiet fury. His mother's legacy had been manipulated in the media during his youth, and now, his grandmother's dignity had been posthumously assaulted. To him, this was not simply a breach of protocol, it was a betrayal of the monarchy's most sacred values. Though he did not make public statements, those close to him say he backed Anne's decision and began initiating his own quiet campaign to reassess the Sussexes' remaining affiliations with the royal household. This included internal discussions about the use of titles. Though Meghan and Harry had relinquished their roles as senior working royals, they still retained the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles, a point of contention among many royalists. William was not alone in believing this privilege could no longer stand uncontested. While it was ultimately a matter for the reigning monarch, William's influence was not insignificant. Behind closed doors, conversations about formally stripping the titles gained momentum. The issue, once considered too divisive to touch, was now being actively debated with surprising seriousness. Across the Atlantic, the reaction was equally complex. In the United States, where Meghan and Harry had carved out a new public identity as victims of royal dysfunction and advocates for mental health and social justice, the fallout was particularly damaging. The recording, authenticated by voice analysis and presented alongside transcripts by a cautious media outlet, called into question the narrative the couple had so carefully cultivated since their departure from royal life. News outlets that had previously defended the couple began to shift tone. While some still cautioned against rushing to judgment, others framed the leak as a moment of reckoning. Talk show hosts who once welcomed Meghan as a modern-day Diana now posed uncomfortable questions. Had the couple weaponized their insider knowledge for personal gain? Was their private behavior congruent with their public messages of compassion, empathy, and healing? Public sentiment also began to fracture. Polls conducted within the first week of the leak showed a steep decline in Meghan's favorability ratings. Among American adults, especially those over the age of 40, trust in her narrative dropped by over 20 percentage points. Younger demographics remained more divided, with some still perceiving her as a target of institutional racism and sexism, but even among her staunchest defenders, questions began to emerge. Corporate partners, too, took notice. Archewell, the Sussexes' nonprofit foundation, found itself under renewed scrutiny. Several of its projects, which relied on partnerships with Fortune 500 companies and philanthropic organizations, encountered delays. At least one brand quietly, and without public explanation, began pulling back from a proposed collaboration. Within Hollywood, Where perception is often more valuable than truth, agents and producers became cautious. The Sussex brand, once seen as a compelling mix of royalty and activism, now carried the scent of controversy that might prove too volatile for long-term investment. Back in the UK, the leak had a polarizing effect on the public. For many, it confirmed what they had suspected all along, that Meghan Markle had manipulated her royal platform for influence and power. Tabloids and broadsheets alike devoted front-page coverage to the story, analyzing every sentence of the recording, interviewing royal historians, and publishing op-eds on the moral decay of modern celebrity culture. Readers wrote in by the thousands, some expressing disgust, others sadness, and still others relief that the truth, as they saw it, had finally been exposed. However, not all responses were negative. Meghan's supporters organized online campaigns defending her, alleging that the leak was strategically timed to undermine her growing influence in American politics and media. Hashtags trended on social media calling for truth, not tapes, and emphasizing the dangers of violating private communication, regardless of content. Legal experts debated whether Meghan could sue for defamation or invasion of privacy, but many concluded that the issue was too complex, especially if the recording had been obtained by a former palace staffer during an internal audit. Amidst the chaos, one voice remained curiously absent: Prince Harry. According to sources close to the couple, he was devastated by the leak, not merely for its content, but for what it symbolized. He had hoped, perhaps naively, that despite all that had occurred, some shred of respect remained between his new life and the family he left behind. Now, with the release of the audio and its implications, that hope was in tatters. He reportedly entered a period of withdrawal, canceling scheduled appearances and declining media inquiries. The rift between Harry and his family, long speculated upon, now seemed irreversible. And yet, some within the palace believed that Harry was not entirely aligned with Meghan's methods. According to one former royal correspondent, Harry was heard expressing regret in private, saying he never intended to hurt his grandmother and that he would never have condoned threatening language. If true, these comments suggest a deeper, more tragic dimension to the crisis, the possibility that Harry, isolated and conflicted, may have lost his way amid the storms of loyalty, love, and resentment. As for Meghan, she remained publicly composed. Her team issued a brief statement calling the leak a gross violation of privacy and an affront to personal dignity, without addressing the content of the recording itself. No interviews followed. No new public appearances. It was as if she and Harry had retreated behind a wall, waiting for the storm to pass. Whether they were planning a counterattack, a rebranding campaign, or a legal response remained unclear. Meanwhile, Princess, and having detonated the proverbial bomb, returned to her royal duties with characteristic determination. She declined comment, as expected, and focused instead on visiting rural charities, attending military ceremonies, and hosting engagements for animal welfare groups. But behind her firm composure was an undeniable message. She had drawn a line. And in doing so, she had forced the monarchy and the world to look squarely at a truth it could no longer ignore. In the halls of government, the fallout lingered. There were whispered conversations about the future of the monarchy, the possibility of reforms, and even discussions, though premature, about what succession might look like in a post-Charles era. The monarchy had survived wars, divorces, abdications, and scandals, but never had it faced such a direct, personal, and modern threat as this. A member of the royal family being accused of emotional coercion against its matriarch, amplified and dissected on a global stage. In the end, the impact of the leak could not be measured in headlines alone. It changed the way the public viewed the royal family, not just as symbols, but as human beings vulnerable to betrayal, pain, and retaliation. It exposed the deep chasms between generations, between tradition and modernity, between private duty and public image. As the dust from the explosive leak began to settle in the public sphere, the real storm brewed behind the closed doors of royal residences. Inside the centuries-old stone walls of Balmoral, Windsor, Clarence House, and Buckingham Palace, the royal family was in flux. Relationships were crumbling, allegiances were shifting, and long-standing lines of influence were being redrawn. The once tightly knit and tightly controlled House of Windsor now resembled something far more volatile. A collection of deeply wounded individuals navigating the uncharted territory of betrayal, legacy, and survival. At the center of it all stood King Charles III, a monarch already burdened by the weight of succession and now engulfed in a controversy that neither he nor his advisors had anticipated. Though Charles had endured personal and public turmoil before, including the highly publicized breakdown of his marriage to Diana, Princess of Wales, this moment was unlike any other. This was not merely scandal. This was an existential threat that cut to the heart of the monarchy's moral standing. And it was personal. Charles, who had worked tirelessly to modernize the monarchy's image, now found himself forced to choose between pragmatism and principle. On one hand was his second son, Harry, once the beloved spare, now estranged and wrapped in controversy alongside his wife. On the other was his sister and, a stalwart symbol of traditional duty, who had defied royal protocol to do what many inside the palace whispered should have been done long ago: expose the rot. Privately, Charles convened a series of emergency family meetings. These were not the formal state briefings with aides and advisors, but intimate, raw gatherings attended only by his closest relatives, including Prince William, the Princess Royal, and, at times, Queen Camilla. According to palace sources, the tone of these discussions was somber and tense. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic walkouts, but the air was thick with the sense that something had irreparably broken. Prince William, who had long harbored silent contempt for the way his brother had handled his exit from royal life, made his position unmistakably clear. This latest crisis, he believed, was the final straw. The recording, in which Meghan had allegedly issued threats toward the Queen, was not just disrespectful, it was, in William's view, unforgivable. He reportedly told his father that continuing to extend any form of recognition or privilege to Harry and Meghan would not only be damaging to the monarchy, but an insult to the memory of Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Camilla, often perceived as more reserved in matters involving the Sussexes, reportedly sided with in William. Her private feelings toward Meghan had always been complex, shaped by years of tension and quiet competition for influence. But in this instance, Camilla's stance was more about safeguarding the monarchy than settling old personal scores. She viewed the situation as a test of the royal family's resilience and its ability to uphold dignity amidst crisis. Princess, and meanwhile, remained unflinching in her convictions. She did not gloat, nor did she press her advantage. Her goal had never been to destroy her nephew, she maintained, but to protect the crown and defend the honor of their mother. In the meetings, she was reportedly measured, factual, and composed, reiterating that what she did was not out of spite, but necessity. Her willingness to risk scandal in defense of the monarchy had earned her a new level of respect within the family, particularly from William, who now saw her as a vital ally in reshaping the future of the institution. The Queen Consort's influence also grew during this period, not just within the family but among the courtiers. Camilla, once vilified by the press and public, now assumed a stabilizing role. She worked closely with the king to navigate internal rifts, quietly ensuring that staff remained loyal and that leaks to the press were minimized. While Charles wavered at times, torn between his paternal instincts and his duty to the crown, Camilla anchored him, reminding him that leadership sometimes required painful decisions. The younger generation of royals, especially those less in the public eye, were also affected. Zara Tindall's daughter, reportedly supported her mother's decision and shared private conversations with William about the future of the monarchy's image. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, once close to Harry, found themselves in a moral quandary. Their loyalty to family clashed with their empathy for their cousin, especially Eugenie, who had long defended Harry in private circles. But even within the broader family, consensus was emerging. Something had to change. The monarchy could no longer afford to operate as though public perception and internal loyalty were mutually exclusive. In this new media landscape, where recordings could be leaked, narratives weaponized, and truths distorted, silence was not just dangerous, it was destructive. That realization led to one of the most significant discussions held during this period: the possible formal removal of Harry and Meghan's royal titles. While the Duke and Duchess of Sussex had stepped back from official duties, they had retained their titles, a point that had caused persistent unease among traditionalists. Now, with the credibility of the monarchy under direct assault, even more progressive members of the royal family began to question the wisdom of letting the titles stand. The process to remove royal titles is not simple. It requires either a direct intervention by the reigning monarch or a legislative act passed by Parliament. But the symbolic value of such a move would be profound. It would mark a formal break, a public acknowledgement that the couple were no longer considered part of the royal fabric. For King Charles, who had long hoped for some form of reconciliation with his son, this was the hardest decision of all. In the weeks following the leak, the king sought private counsel from constitutional experts and former aides to Queen Elizabeth. He even reached out to one or two senior members of the Church of England, hoping for moral clarity. The advice he received was measured but pointed. While forgiveness is virtuous, leadership requires consequences. And without consequence, the public would lose faith in the integrity of the monarchy. It was around this time that a draft statement began to circulate among senior aides. The language was careful, respectful, even, but the message was unmistakable. The king, it proposed, would formally announce that while he continued to love all members of his family, the institution of the monarchy had to be protected above all. And as such, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex would henceforth be known simply as Harry and Meghan, private citizens with no formal connection to the royal family. The statement was never immediately released, but its mere existence marked a turning point. It demonstrated that the royal family was no longer content to absorb attacks silently. It was preparing to draw boundaries, to assert control over its narrative and legacy. Whether or not the final decision would align with the draft remained to be seen, but internally, the royal family had shifted from reactive to proactive. In the background of these high-level discussions, palace staff were also dealing with the emotional and psychological toll of the crisis. Long-serving aides, some of whom had worked under the late Queen, described the atmosphere as more strained than at any time since Diana's death. Loyalty was tested. Morale was fragile. Rumors of resignations and internal power struggles began to circulate. But at the same time, a sense of unity began to coalesce around a shared belief: the crown must endure. The cultural implications of these internal shifts extended far beyond the palace walls. British society, which had long relied on the monarchy as a symbol of continuity, was now engaging in deeper questions about its future. What did it mean to be royal in the 21st century? Could the monarchy survive without reform? Should it? And yet, despite the chaos, many within the public felt a renewed sense of appreciation for the monarchy's quieter figures, those who had long avoided the spotlight but now stood as its most loyal defenders. Princess and stoicism, Prince William's composure, even Camilla's quiet strength. In a time of confusion and disillusionment, these figures became symbols of resilience. The internal royal reactions to the Meghan Markle recording leak were not just emotional responses to a family betrayal. They were the early stages of a restructuring of influence, purpose, and identity within the monarchy, a generation once defined by survival. Through divorces, scandals, and tragedies, was now redefining itself through clarity, boundaries, and strength. As the scandal rooted in Meghan Markle's leaked audio erupted across the globe, the reaction from the public and media unfolded with a ferocity not seen since the fallout of Princess Diana's death. The digital world ignited. News tickers rolled 24/7 with updates. Social media platforms became battlegrounds. Editorials, podcasts, op-eds, reaction videos, and panel debates filled every conceivable space, each offering its version of the truth and fueling the firestorm surrounding the British monarchy. The public backlash was immediate, intense, and unrelenting. What started as a bombshell recording involving Meghan allegedly threatening Queen Elizabeth II quickly morphed into a larger cultural war, one that pitted tradition against modernity, loyalty against defiance, and truth against spin. On one side were ardent royalists, furious over the perceived betrayal of the Queen's legacy. On the other side, supporters of Meghan and Harry, who argued that the recording was taken out of context or possibly manipulated. But for a vast number in the middle, shock turned to disillusionment as they watched a historic institution they had trusted fall into public disgrace. Tabloid newspapers, particularly in the UK, splashed incendiary headlines across front pages. "Betraying the Crown," read one. "Meghan's menace, how the Duchess threatened the Queen," screamed another. There were printed alleged transcripts of the leaked recording, dissecting every word, every pause, every inflection and tone. High-circulation publications like The Sun, Daily Mail, and The Telegraph commissioned royal correspondents and former palace insiders to offer commentary, many of whom did not hold back in their condemnation. Piers Morgan, ever vocal in his criticism of Meghan, went on a televised tirade that quickly went viral. He labeled her behavior as treasonous and called for the monarchy to formally strip both her and Prince Harry of their remaining titles. Morgan's comments were amplified by right-wing media outlets across the Atlantic, which had long framed Meghan as the antagonist in the royal saga. Across the ocean, American media was more split. Outlets like CNN and MSNBC approached the situation with caution, awaiting independent verification of the recording's authenticity. Others, such as Fox News and certain YouTube influencers, adopted a more aggressive stance. For the first time, even liberal-leaning personalities who had once praised Meghan's openness about mental health and racism began to question the trajectory of her actions and their impact on the monarchy. Celebrity reactions poured in, adding further intrigue to the storm. Oprah Winfrey, who had hosted Meghan and Harry's bombshell 2021 interview, declined to comment directly but issued a carefully worded statement about the importance of context, accountability, and respect for legacy. Meanwhile, other public figures, such as Sharon Osbourne and Judi Dench, made headlines for voicing outright disappointment in Meghan's alleged words, emphasizing that attacking a monarch who could no longer defend herself crossed a line. The wave of backlash also manifested in public protests. In cities across the United Kingdom, particularly in royal strongholds such as Windsor, Edinburgh, and York, demonstrators gathered to express solidarity with the crown. Union Jack flags waved in the wind, placards decried betrayal, and chants echoed sentiments like "Long live the Queen" and "Defend the monarchy." While mostly peaceful, the protests reflected the emotional weight carried by millions of Britons who saw the monarchy not merely as a political institution but as a symbol of continuity and shared identity. In contrast, counter-protests emerged in London, Manchester, and parts of the United States, particularly Los Angeles and New York, where pro-Sussex supporters argued that the leak was politically motivated, possibly doctored, and indicative of a broader effort to silence dissent within the royal framework. Hashtags like #WeStandWithMeghan and #SussexSolidarity began trending. The digital schism mirrored the cultural and generational divide already present in debates about royalty, privilege, and race. The impact of the backlash extended beyond individuals and opinions. It struck brands and corporate interests tied to Harry and Meghan. Netflix, Spotify, and Penguin Random House, all of whom had inked lucrative deals with the couple, came under pressure to reevaluate their associations. Shareholders demanded explanations. Public relations teams scrambled. Rumors swirled about boardroom meetings and emergency Zoom calls. For these companies, the question wasn't just about ethics, it was about liability in public. Netflix, which had aired Meghan and Harry's documentary series, initially remained silent, prompting waves of online criticism. When the platform finally responded, it issued a brief statement noting it would closely monitor the situation. Spotify removed promotional material related to Meghan's podcast, while Penguin Random House reportedly paused internal discussions on Harry's rumored follow-up to his memoir Spare. Behind the scenes, executives debated whether continued affiliation with the Sussexes would do more harm than good. Perhaps most striking was the response from charities and nonprofit organizations aligned with the couple's Archewell Foundation. Several prominent NGOs, including mental health and environmental groups, issued statements reiterating their commitment to apolitical engagement and distancing themselves from controversy. A few went further, suspending partnerships and requesting further clarity from Archewell. The ripple effect was undeniable. The brand that Meghan and Harry had spent years building was facing reputational implosion. The backlash even reached the gates of government. Members of Parliament from both major British political parties made statements about the importance of royal integrity. While no one in government openly called for legal action against Meghan or Harry, there were calls to investigate whether any laws had been broken in the leak's context or if state protocols were violated in the handling of sensitive conversations involving a head of state. Amid this whirlwind, Buckingham Palace faced an impossible challenge: how to respond in a way that protected the monarchy without escalating the conflict. Traditionally, the palace adhered to a well-known strategy: never complain, never explain. But as outrage spread and speculation became more vicious, silence was increasingly seen as complicity. After considerable pressure, the palace released a short, somber statement. It acknowledged the seriousness of the claims and expressed sorrow over the deeply hurtful and troubling content of the recording. While it did not mention Meghan or Harry by name, the implication was clear: lines had been crossed, and the Queen's dignity had been tarnished. royal sources began to leak curated stories to the press, subtly shaping the narrative. It was emphasized that the Queen had always loved her grandchildren, but had been deeply affected by the choices made by Harry and Meghan. These stories reminded the public of the Queen's lifetime of duty, her role in stabilizing Britain through wars, recessions, and political upheaval. This effort to reframe the monarchy's image as enduring and principled began to resonate. Public opinion polls conducted in the days following the scandal revealed seismic shifts. Support for the monarchy among younger demographics, already in decline, plummeted further. But among older Britons and Commonwealth citizens in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, support surged. These groups saw the scandal as proof that the monarchy was under siege and needed to be protected more than ever. In the United States, Harry and Meghan's approval ratings took a hit. Once viewed as sympathetic figures escaping a rigid institution, they were now being scrutinized for their role in perpetuating discord. Polling data showed a drop in favorability among key demographics, particularly those who valued traditional family dynamics and perceived national respect. Meanwhile, social media platforms became increasingly chaotic. Bot campaigns, digital misinformation, and AI-generated clips distorted the situation further. Deepfake videos and edited audio clips circulated, blurring the line between reality and fiction. Major platforms like Twitter, X, Instagram, and TikTok issued community guidelines and removed thousands of posts flagged for false information or hate speech, but the damage was done. The truth was now buried under a mountain of noise. Cultural institutions also weighed in. Universities, media watchdogs, and public figures debated the ethics of leaks and the consequences of digital surveillance. Was this truly a moment of justice or a terrifying example of weaponized privacy? Scholars likened it to the Watergate scandal and its impact on institutional trust. The conversation was no longer just about a family, but about a system of power, influence, and legacy. As the backlash reached its crescendo, Meghan remained largely out of the public eye. Her team issued a denial of wrongdoing and suggested the leak was maliciously timed to distract from her philanthropic initiatives. Harry, too, remained silent, avoiding public events and delaying scheduled appearances. The silence was read by some as strategic retreat, by others as an admission of guilt. Regardless of intent, the damage had been done. The royal family stood fractured. Public trust had been bruised. The media firestorm continued to rage. And in households across the world, the same question lingered. How had it come to this? In the days following the audio leak and the public's widespread backlash, the royal family found itself in the throes of one of its greatest modern challenges.